It's loud by Karen Hill. Streaming across all major platforms, and you are locked in. You are locked in. Pour up a glass of wine, ladies. Any flow, fellas. And get ready to turn the fuckery meter up to lit. It's Karen Hill live on Say It Loud Radio on your favorite internet platform, streaming live.
It is another episode of Say It Loud podcast with your girl, Karen L here. You know how we do. Who's crying? Hold on. We're going to have to take that again. Hold on. All right. It is another episode of Say It Loud podcast with your girl, Karen L here. And today in my hot seat is the artist Anubis. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Who is joining me in the Say It Loud studio so that we can hang out, have a good time, and of course, celebrate the artists that need to be celebrated out here in these streets. What's up, Anubis? How you doing?
I am great. I am really great. It's been a long year, but like the best week ever. You know, when you get a feeling of a sense of accomplishment and you get to start to breathe a little bit. It's really good feeling. It's really good feeling.
I love that so much because I feel like people don't celebrate those moments enough. So can we just celebrate that moment a little bit? Can we talk about the accomplishment? Is that something we could talk about?
Yes, definitely.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So in the beginning of the year, I said to myself, I'm always talking about, doing a one-man show. And in January, I said, hey, let's do it. And I had planned to do 2 shows. And the first one went so well that a mentor of mine who's been in the theater production for like 30-something years was like, you need to do like a run through the summer. And this past Sunday, we just completed the run. And it was the most amazing of the shows that we did. It was supposed to have one more show, but fortunately, we knew ahead of time that show was going to be the last one. So we got to really experience that. And it was so amazing, just literally having a feeling of we did it. We accomplished the goal. It's a one-man show, but I say we because it takes a team. It takes a team to put it together. So it was so amazing. And then Sunday, I got to do nothing, which was amazing. I haven't gotten a chance to do nothing in months. So that was great.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and the show that you had going on this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. As you already stated, and it's down here, I'm the artist Anubis. I'm a Harlemite. I've about almost 13 years ago, I started this open mic called Harlem Bomb Shelter. And the idea was to create a space for people in Harlem because all the poets that I knew were traveling to either Brooklyn or to Nuyorican, which was downtown, and nothing negative about that, but there wasn't a space for us uptown. So I was like, hey, I'll do it. That kind of grew into what is now, this multi-programmed literary arts organization with workshops, showcases, our open mic, of course. We have a mentorship program. We just did our 2 Sundays ago, we did our 2nd annual Teen Poetry Slam, where the winner, we take them across, Harlem to a bunch of events. So, in the journey, creating space for other people, I decided, hey, to be serious about my own craft. We decided, it's time for me to do my one-man show. And my one-man show ended up being this project that explores really my own, elements of anxiety, and kind of plays around with the comedic elements of it, as well as the dramatic elements of it. One of the things I learned in my own journey with therapy is that, I would have these, what I started identifying as anxiety attacks, but I never really knew why, because I can never identify what is causing it. And in therapy, we realized that there was no single thing causing my anxiety attacks. It was the collaboration of all the small things. Because all the small things add up. And so in the show, I actually get to explore that, right? hey, this is what issue, like I can't talk to women. Here's another issue, right? And then it's like, oh wait, these issues are building up, and the show gets to really explore that using poetry, some anecdotes, comedy, drama, and some amazing lighting, because all elements of the show are important. And like I said, I did it at first just to celebrate myself. I get what I call birthday anxiety. And that for me is when I feel like a lot of people have it. We just don't identify things.
Right.
And that's when like my birthday's coming up and you're like, I haven't done anything with my life. Like what I was supposed to achieve. Now keep in mind, throughout the whole year, we're achieving, right?
Right.
But then somewhere in that moment, you're missing some check mark, right? So one of the things I did at 35 is I figured, you know what? If I do something on my birthday, it'll trick my brain to just focus on that, as opposed to so I don't even look at a list. I just have that one thing, but that one thing is right in my face, right? So we plan to do the one show on my birthday this year. We did it, and it was, people would tell me like, I was just doing it for me, but people would tell me that like, what it did for them and how it touched them and how it was this mental health thing and this vulnerability and this stuff. So then the rest of the shows were for everybody else. It's this experience for everyone else, and what they get from it. And it's been an amazing journey, discovering this project that, it was originally a selfish thing, but when you're given something and you put it out there, that's a great thing about art. People get to see what they need to see in it.
Yeah, I think there's so many accolades in everything that you just said. First of all, being able to be so vulnerable in a space like, we have our art, and I'm learning more and more every day, because I consider myself an artist, that it takes a certain amount of vulnerability to be the best artist that you can be, right? Because essentially you're telling your story, even if even if it's poetry, if it's a joke, whatever it is, you're telling some element of yourself, and there's some element of vulnerability in that. So I think you should be very proud of that, and we're going to touch on that in a second. But also to talk about like mental health and how it affects people, and how so many of us are walking around like thinking that these feelings are normal or abnormal, right? So like thinking it's normal for me to feel this way on my birthday, and not realizing like, everybody else feels this way, or vice versa, saying, well, you know what, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to be the person that says I feel this way, even though I do, and I think that that's really important too, because when you make it an art and you make it something that everybody can connect with, it's like, oh my God, I've been feeling like that too. But if you went and you asked them on the street, they'd be like, no way. So I think those are things to really celebrate in the work that you've done, because it affects so many people. How was it difficult for you to become that vulnerable in creating this piece of work?
Yes and no. So there was two things that made it easy, that overrode the difficult parts. One is I started to just realize in my own poetry, before I was putting this together, just in my own stuff, I started realizing that I actually am naturally vulnerable in my poetry. But part of that is because everyone sees it as a performance.
Right.
So literally, no one, it's like I can be honest and no one ever interacting with me as if I've told any honest truth, because they saw a show. Right. So you get to hide behind the performance of it. I can say, hey, there's this line I say, if I talked about the year where every day I contemplated suicide, half of you would think it's just a poem. Right. So I get to hide behind the fact that it's a poem, and that's it. So I don't get to actually feel like I'm vulnerable, because no one ever really sees it. Like, oh, that was a good piece. Great job. Literally only once. And for me, this is a good thing, but only once since I did like some of my poems where I would recognize the year where I was like suicidal. Only once did someone say, hey, I heard your poem. Are you okay? And I was like, thank you. I'm good now. I felt that way years before I wrote the poem. But I appreciate that. But that's one of the things for me, I get to hide behind that because no one else does that. The other thing that made it easy is I'm good at compartmentalizing. So meaning when I really was trying to push it for this show, as a producer, I said, this show needs an emotional moment here, right?
Oh,
So then me, the producer, told me, the writer, hey, you need to write something for this part of the show. And me,
right,
the writer, is like, okay, I can write that. And then me, the performer, is like, here's your script, right?
right.
So there's like a weird detachment that I get to allow myself to have, so that, you know, the brain that says this, the show needs it, the people needs it, the arc needs it, it gets to override. Because if I just went straight with the me, I would have been like, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I get to
Yeah.
kind of like just big picture it sometimes and say the show would be better if you did this. And I'm like, you're right. I guess I have to.
Right. That's amazing too, that you're the person making all of those decisions in your own work, you know, and being able to be reflective and compartmentalize like that. Because I don't know if everybody could do that.
Listen, it is a gift and a curse because it's one of the things I always can compartmentalize like that. So socially, some of my friends don't love it.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. I'm actually pretty good at it too. And then my friends will be like, but you're keeping secrets. And I'm like, it's not really a secret. I just don't want to share.
right,
You know, like this stays here, that stays there,
right,
this stays, everything
exactly.
goes in its place. That don't belong over there. And
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
that.
Like, this is not vital to this moment right here. Like,
Right.
okay.
Right. Yeah. 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 But I don't know if everybody knows how to do that.
And you know, I think we're some of us are built to do certain things, right? Because one of the things is I like to surround myself with more extroverted and more empathetic people, and we just got to collab, you know. So
Right.
you know, as long as we know where our superpowers work, and then we fill in the gaps, you know.
I love that. I love that. What was it like? So let's take it back a little bit to how all of this started. Because
Yeah.
I think the journey is also as important as the work, that the body of work that we all see in the end, right? Everybody
Mhm.
sees the final production and what we show you with the lights, but like, how did this all start? Like, when did you start writing poetry?
Uh, to some degree, very vaguely, I actually say like second grade. It was a weird thing, because you know I didn't like learning how to read. And the school I went to thought, you know, I didn't know how to read because I had like a learning disability. I just didn't feel like doing it.
Mhm.
So they put me in a bunch of classes, and I kind of learned how to read very quickly. And by the end of that year, I was writing stories, and I was just in love with short stories. And essentially, you know, in terms of our style of poetry, that's what it is. But when I really started really getting more structured, I had joined this youth program when I was 13, and it introduced me to like these poetic monologues as a part of activism. And
Mhm.
I had started to get really annoyed with adults at the time in their stereotypes of teenagers, because those
Yes.
stereotypes definitely didn't reflect me or the people who I considered my friends. So then putting those elements together, what I consider the first, you know, performance poem I wrote was called "Just Because I'm a Teen." It wasn't very good, but but the idea that like if I put my words to a rhyme or rhythm, people will actually listen. That became
Right.
revolutionary to me, you know. So if I have some random rant or thought, you know, put it in poetry or some theatrical, you know, writing, and then people will sit and listen. And now here I am. I talk on stage for an hour, and people are, you know, hooked to every word,
Right.
you know,
Right.
because you learn how to use the art to just ramble, express whatever you're feeling.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that for you. And I think it's really important, even at a young age, that kids understand how to use their words.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know, a
yeah.
lot of times, a lot of people are feeling a lot of emotions, and the biggest problem with emotion is communication, right? And having the words to express that. And in today's day and age, with poetry, it's like there's so many different ways to use poetry and to tell your story. So,
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
happened? What happened after 13?
I mean, like I said, I was in the youth program for a while, literally for 20 years, maybe a month short of 20 years. But somewhere in between is when I had went to a friend of mine, Zora Howard. She was the first New York City Youth Poet Laureate, and she had took me to, or invited me to, an open mic she was doing in Harlem. And then I was like, when's the next one? And she was like, nah, it was just a one
Ain't
shot.
no more.
It ain't no more. And for me, it clicked, right, as something that I can do. And even then, I wasn't serious personally about it. I just knew it was something I could do. I was familiar enough with poetry. I had written some things. I had gone to a couple of workshops, and I had the relationships to start the open mic. It wasn't until 2019 that I said, okay, I'm gonna be serious about my art. And I had 2017, 2018, I got in a divorce. And that was the year that I would say was the hardest year for me for a lot of reasons. And it wasn't the divorce itself. It's just things that happen after like 8 to 10 years in a relationship when it ends, where, relationship aside, I found myself reflecting on what was my journey in that time. And I felt very much like I feel like I didn't grow anything, right? Like I am exactly where I was 10 years ago. I didn't,
Wow.
so that was hard. But when I came out of that by 2019, I'm very much like the type who, I never want to, say anything negative or bash or come off as bitter or anything like that. So I always kept like my stories to myself. And someone told me, like, but they're your stories too. You're an artist. And I was like, you know what? I got some stories. I've lived some life at this point. At that point, I spent at least 7 years creating a space for other people to share their stories. It's time for me to get serious and use stories that I've had. And that was kind of like the turning point for me in terms of like just being serious about using, my stories as part of my art. And that was kind of like and then, 2020 happened. And a lot of us just jumped online. So that really, was for us in the poetry world, that combination of a time period actually, was beneficial if you knew how to use it, because now the world got smaller. We were all on Instagram or Zoom, and getting to communicate and meet all these artists. And I had someone who like pushed my artistry, and he lives in Baltimore, right? So and like we would talk every day. It was just a revolutionary moment for me as an artist. And that's probably the most amount of writing that I did in a particular time span. Not like I had much else to do.
I loved it, low key. Like, I didn't like that we couldn't go outside, but I felt like it was a very creative and productive time in my life. And I wouldn't mind like living like that as an artist, because like you said, you have this whole, because everybody stood still, you got to pick the communities that you wanted to be a part of.
Yes.
And then you had time to really indulge and divulge the things that you love and enjoy and really be there. So the people that were baking banana bread were doing that. Yeah. And the people that were writing were doing that. And the people that were podcasting were doing that. And the people that were, and so you really had time to kind of like build a community around that. And that was kind of a good thing.
It was. And one of the, and one of the, I guess, the greatest decisions I made that came out of that was, between how, all the riots and protests around George Floyd at the time and all those things, just that boiling pot at that moment. And then there was a threat of a curfew. It lasted for like a day, but I did this on June 20th. We did this post Juneteenth / poetry and protest outdoor open mic that we called Shelter in the Streets, which we've continued doing. But that was a great moment because now people really wanted to, there was no venues, right? So people was like, yeah, we're going to be outside. And then we got to actually, some people who I met online, we came out in real life. And some people, our connections were from that moment, right? So, it was just so much happening that if you were wise enough to use the moment, it was, very beneficial. It was sad, but one of the best relationships I had, the person who produced my last show, we met in person for the first time at that event, and she performed a poem about her father dying of COVID. And she always speaks about the space that was created for her to be able to do that and what that meant to her. And you know, the unfortunate nature of that, but we now have a relationship, you know, a partnership that's been blooming because we were smart enough to you know, we recognize the pain of it, but also engage the power of it, you know?
Right. And I think that's really nice that that's poetry. That's telling your stories, and that's being an artist and saying, okay, I'm going to take whatever it is that I'm feeling and create something out of it. That's what art is, in my opinion. Right. I always tell people, if you walk into a museum and you don't feel anything, not see anything, feel anything, then they didn't do their job. You're supposed to feel something. So I feel like if you can take all of those things and make it into something that people can understand, that could feel, and it doesn't have to always be a happy feeling. You just have to feel.
Yeah, that's the key.
And then they did their job. And they did their job. Then they told their story. And I think that's the part of the artistry that we need to celebrate, and what we need to look at when we're looking at artists and how they tell their stories. With spoken word, it's evolved a lot over the years. So how has that experience been, like watching poetry change over the last couple of years? You know, when you're a little kid, you read poetry and it's just like this very, like, that doesn't rhyme, I can't say that. And then we got into the spoken word, and we really realized, in my opinion, that spoken word almost, I tell people, like, spoken word artists to me are even better than rappers, because I've heard some spoken word that I was like, yo, that's fire, yo, like, record that. You know, like these rappers think they're saying something, and then you hear spoken word and it's like for me, because I'm an artist and I love words and I used to be an English teacher, it is a whole nother level. But I also know that, being a hip hop head, how the styles of spoken word has changed over the last how many years, just like everything else, and has evolved. And what has that experience been like, especially now that you have like teens coming in and they're bringing their personality and their era and genre into it?
It is interesting, and it's what's funny is there's some of the things I've noticed the most as an open mic curator is certain like tropes that are new tropes that, and I'll sit with one of my people who's been with me for the 13 years, and I'm like, when did we start doing that, right? And it's even certain, but the thing is, we're always picking up from someone, and that's how it evolves, right? We're picking up something from somewhere, and then someone else sees us do it, and then that's a thing.
It's like a fashion trend.
Yes, no, literally. There's a poet, Rudy Francisco, who, and I didn't know this was his thing. He kind of became known for using this phrase, which is to say. Now, I just heard a bunch of poets use that phrase, so I was like, oh, that's an element for spoken word. Let me use that, right? That was in a conversation on Clubhouse, and people were talking about how, you know, people got that from Rudy Francisco. Well, I didn't, but I got that from someone else who got it from someone else who got it from someone else. So now this thing that people pick from a popular poet becomes more normalized. You have a poet like Black Chakra, who is really heavy on bar style poetry. And then you get a lot more bar style poets, some, you know, better at it than others. But they know that they heard that from someone, but they got that from them. One of the things I tell people all the time, what we call poetry voice, I believe came from Sonia Sanchez, because I've gotten to see her and meet her. And literally the way that people use poetry voice is just how she talks. That is literally how it is. It is one of the most confusing experiences listening to her talk, because it always sounds like she's in the middle of a poem. Right. And but the thing is, the poets, your newer poets, don't know where that came from. They know that another poet. And then of course you have the infusion of hip hop and all its tricks, which hip hop uses some of the most complex and amazing literary devices. The thing that I think makes spoken word often a better tool is it gets to breathe. So I actually started off rapping, and then I changed one of my songs that there's a rap song, but I was performing as spoken word, and people were like, "Yo, I really got to absorb what you were saying." But essentially, the writing and the style is the same. More and more with hip hop, it gets truncated. But even that's a new skill that I start stealing. Nicki Minaj is one of the, and I'm not a big Nicki fan. I'm not saying anything bad about her, but I'm not like a Nicki fan.
Yeah, same.
There's a style that she does, and other people do it too, though, where she'll complete the metaphor with one word, and we understand it because of the implication there. So, you know, anytime anyone in any art form is using a thing, you know, every art form picks it up, and poetry is not an exception to that. So if you have a poet who gets really popular with doing these short Instagram poems, you start saying, oh, there's a strength in economy of words. So now more poets are doing that. So as a curator, I get to kind of watch a lot of that. And say I can see where this evolved from, and sometimes I don't. But I know that that's what's happening. I know that, you know, and the other thing that's made it happen really fast since 2020 is the fact that we got smaller and closer. So things that open mics were using phrases or styles that was being used big in Atlanta are now happening in New Hampshire because we spent all, 3 years on, Instagram meeting each other and saying, hey, I like that. There's elements of word choices that are being used in London that I'm now hearing all the time, and I can now pick that up. So if anything, I think, to the earlier point, 2020 kind of became like a spoken word boom in terms of, things getting meshed together. But that presents the challenge. The challenge is we all become a little less unique in that way. Because rather than it being poets from over here used it, there's something I teach that I got from poets in Baltimore. I'll credit Baltimore poets. But up until 2020, I would have never known
it was from them.
Right. And it might not have even transported. So now any young poet I'm teaching, they're getting this element of the lesson. But that creates an amazing challenge. And I'll wrap by saying, this lesson I learned years ago that I now teach because of this challenge. To be good, you got to do 3 I's, right? Imitation. You see someone who does something great, copy it. That's okay. That's fine. You don't stop there. You don't go take that out and perform it because now you're just being a thief. No, but you copy it till you learn that skill. 2 is integration, right? You take what you learn from someone else and mix it into your own thing. And that's where a lot of people stop. And this is where the great challenge is. Innovation, right? How do I take what the skill that I learned and mix to my own thing and now add something to it? Yeah, and that becomes the fun challenge that becomes a little bit more necessary now that we've all blended so much. But it's the opportunity to say, okay, cool, I got this, understanding from Baltimore. I got this word choice from Oakland, right? And now what do I get to do original to it, which wrap it back into a circle. That's kind of how my show came to be, because I said to myself, if I start comparing myself to other poets, I'm not going to be as good at what they're good at, right? So what am I good at? That's their thing. That's their thing. So what I said I'm good at is kind of telling a little story that segues into my poetry. And I got so good at that, I said, wait, I could turn segueing stories into poetry into one-man show, and that's happened. So my superpower is the segue, which, and I don't say this negatively, I've seen more poets start to use. And then so poetry is going to evolve more. So 5 years from now, you're going to see a lot more poets using segues in their sets because, I did a run of a one-man show that made that even more popular. So it's just constantly evolving and constantly picking up from each other. And I would say, like, I tell my friends, there's stuff that I do that I'm like, hey, I got that from you. This hand motion, right? This element, but you gotta imitation, integration, and then innovation. You got to go to the last.
I like that. I think people should do that more. So tell me a little bit more about this one-man show and the experience of the one-man show, like curating the pieces that you put into it. We talked about a little bit, but then like, how do you innovate and go from there to whatever's next?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, no, it was quite a process. It took a little longer to even curate the pieces um than I planned. I knew that there was pieces I had that really worked already. But I knew also that the people who was mostly going to support me have heard all the pieces. So I said I had to write at least 4 new pieces. And I ended up not even doing that. I ended up writing 3 new pieces, just because it took a little longer to get to. Uh, and I had to look and say, well, I had to look at it as a production. What is the big story I want to tell? And like a good TV show, there's a plot and a B plot that connects to that full theme. So what are those things? So like for me, one of the stories I'd already been telling was about like my terrible dating life. So I was like, you know what, that story kind of already exists. That's the A plot, right? But it starts off with my social anxiety, so we can kind of use that as a comedic launching point. And then then it became a kind of like, what are the other emotional beats that I want to hit? I have 3 poems in my book about my oldest daughter. I have 2 daughters. My oldest daughter, she was born with kidney disease, so I kind of wrote 3 poems about that experience. I ended up getting to donate one of my kidneys to her. So literally in my book, one poem is about like an angry prayer to God about the time I found out that what that was like. Then I had this really cool poem that I wrote from the perspective of the kidney that is still inside me, missing his twin brother.
And that's very interesting.
It's people's favorite one in the show.
Yeah.
And then I wrote a poem that I wrote in a workshop that was meant to inspire others to be living donors. People always told me like, "Oh my God, you're a hero," and I'm like, "No, I'm not," because that was the easiest thing to do as a dad.
Right.
To have one job, keep my kid alive, right?
Right.
As a matter of fact, the one person who was least impressed that I gave a kidney, I went to an event with a bunch of kidney donors, and the one woman next to me donated to her son. So she was like so unimpressed, and I was like, I love that. I absolutely you understand. We just
Right.
and so I had to like kind of decide. I didn't use all those pieces in the show, but I was like, all right, what are those I'm gonna pick for the show at this particular beat? And then there was, looking at the show, and I said, all right, a lot of the performance is almost the same. So I need something that is much more movement. And that's when I decided, okay, I gotta write a poem about my anxiety attacks that I get to really make it dramatic, right? It's more a drama piece than, so literally I'm picking or writing pieces based on, what a good storytelling arc would be. And I got to test it out at this storytellers conference, and I hadn't finished writing all the pieces yet. So I did it with the piece that I had, and I thought I was going to write one more piece to end the show, but with the piece that I had, it was like great response. I was like, well,
Right.
That organic moment of, well, the audience has spoken. And that's one of the things I say about like spoken word and poetry. Like the audience is part of the storytelling.
Right.
So you gotta listen to what the audience is saying. You can't just be like, well, I'm gonna add this piece. No, if the audience, was moved at this moment, well, then they're right.
Right.
That
Right.
let that happen. So now it's a question of, what to do with it next. And since, so many people have been responding to the mental health component, partnering up with people who do things like that. Really October is going to be the time where I really sit with that. But those are some of the things that kind of came out of it. I had another thought, but I can't remember what it was.
I think that's great though. I think that's plenty. I think that does plenty. That's a lot, you know. And I think that you're moving people in so many different ways. You're moving people to be artists. You're moving people to be activists. You're moving people to donate. You're moving people to kind of like understand who they are in their own life and their own identity in their own life. And that's a lot. That's a heavy crown.
Yeah.
That's a heavy crown. Listen, when you say like, I don't know what else. I mean, what do you mean? You don't need it. Like, that's a lot. You don't have to do more because you're doing a lot with that as it is.
That's one of the things I've gotten to. I've gotten really towards a place of accepting that, you know, for up until literally a couple of months ago, you know, up until a couple of months ago, it was hard for me to like accept when I'm doing good work or doing enough. But that's because since, you know, I was 13, one of my mentors brought the play Sarafina from South Africa to Broadway. And another one of my mentors was a Black Panther arrested at 16, right? So those were kind of like my growing up, my benchmarks of like whether or not I'm doing enough with my life and what effect am I having. But I've recently started to get really good at releasing myself from that pressure. But it is kind of hard, you know, when you surround yourself with giants, you don't necessarily know how big you are, you know?
Right. Yeah, I struggle with that too. But I don't think it has anything to do with my mentors. I think it has to do with me being a kid. And when you don't get positive praise as a kid much, you go into being an adult. Well, that's, you know, therapy. You go into an adult feeling like I'm unsure, you know?
What's funny is I always complain about that though. So I always say I'm jealous of those who felt like they needed to prove something to people who doubted them, because I'm proving people who believed in me wrong. You know, It's like, oh, you're gonna be great. Literally, I feel like my earliest moment of what I recognize as anxiety, I was in high school, and the speaker came to speak. The speaker came to speak, right? The speaker came to speak. The speaker came and he said something like, "Who's the next, you know, Malcolm and Martins?" And two of the older women, one of the mothers and one of them was a staff of the school. They was like, you know, "Luther, he is," and I'm like,
right.
I gotta be what? You know?
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. And so now I'm spending every day like, what have I done that that satisfies the expectation of me? And I've, you know, it's taken me years to let that go, you know?
Yeah, that's hard because that feels like the bar is really high.
Yeah, and I know they meant it well as a compliment, but the way I absorbed it, I was like, I'm not doing nothing with my life. I'm not Malcolm and Martin.
I have moments where I say I'm not doing anything with my life, and then I kind of go through my camera roll sometimes, and then, you know, I'll sit in the car and be like, this is not what I wanted. It's not going the way I wanted. It's not. And then other days I'll go through my camera roll, or I'll talk to someone. And matter of fact, I'll tell you a story. I actually was asked maybe last year or the year before to be a shiro. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means, but it was an organization in Chicago that worked with young women who were teachers and filmmakers and artists, which are all the things that I love. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go be a shiro. And will you come to this Zoom thing? And I'm like, yeah, you know, put it on the calendar, no big deal. I had no idea what I was doing. I just said yes, because why not? And the guy, I go to the meeting and he reads this bio and runs off all of these amazing things, and I get off the call and I had no idea. I mean, while he's doing it, and at the end he says my name, and I just was blown away, because I had no idea in my own life that was all of the things that I had done. You know what I mean? Like, somebody was reading out all of these accolades about someone, and I'm like, oh, wow. And at the end, he introduces me, and I'm sitting there going like, oh shit, I didn't even realize that was me, because in my everyday life, I'm like, it's still not enough. It's still not enough. And then somebody did that, and I got off the call and I was just like, oh my God, I had never heard, like, in words, somebody say that about me like that way. So sometimes,
What's your favorite accomplishment on that list that you hadn't thought about?
You know something, to be totally honest with you, I don't think about them. I have a associate's degree, a undergrad degree, a master's degree, and I'm in school right now for my second master's degree. None of them are hanging in my house. And they probably won't ever. They're in a box because the things that mean the most to me are not that. The things that mean the most to me are like my kids and my grandkids, and they're laughing, and my parents and my siblings and my best friends.
So you messed yourself up just now. I asked you what was your favorite accomplishment. You're the one who went to your degrees. You could have just said your kids.
Yeah.
So that might be
or like the podcast or the business. Like I love all of that stuff. I appreciate all of it. It's the things that make me happy, and I do it because it makes me happy. But if you said what's your favorite accomplishment, it would 110% be my kids.
That's your answer.
110%. Like most proud of in the whole entire the best thing I ever did, my kids.
I often say if I could be a dad professionally, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Best thing I ever did. Like I tell people I am in love with them. They're like, you can't be. And I'm like, no, I'm in love with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't just love them. I am in love with them. Those are my best friends, bad boys for life, till the wheels fall off. And yeah, the group chat is lit. Like that is my breath. And that will be the first thing for forever.
No, yeah, I have two daughters, and I literally in my phone is my heart and my love. You know, they are amazing. They are, annoying and stressful.
Yes.
But when I have them, it is my favorite thing for them to be in my house. Literally.
Yeah.
They were fighting with each other the other night, and one of them was like, "Hey, can I stay in your room?" And of course I'm like, "Leave me alone." Yeah, but I'm really like, "Yes, stay with me." Hey,
how old are they?
12 and 14.
Oh, they're at a very interesting age.
Yes. Yeah. So every time I get a nice positive energy from them, I'm ecstatic. I'm like,
yeah. 12 and 14 is like they're like sisters, but they're in different places. You would think that 2 years at that point is not a big deal. When they're like 2 and 4, it's not a big deal. But 12 and 14 is like, oh my God, I'm a teenager versus you're not that quite yet, and then they get older and then they,
Yeah, but they are definitely best of friends, but they're literally, if you with someone way too long, it's you need a break from people sometimes. So sometimes they come to me for it, which is great.
Yeah. I love that. I even tell my parents. I told my parents that my siblings were the best gift they ever gave me. That was the best thing my parents ever gave me, my siblings, because I never had to really do life alone.
Yeah, I was never a good sibling. I'm the oldest of 4, and I literally move like I'm solo, and they just pretty much follow wherever I go. So
yeah, I move like solo sometimes, but I think there's a security in knowing that, like, like my grandma passed away a couple of years ago, and I remember going, the only people on the planet that know what I'm feeling are these 3 other people.
Listen, my grandma passed January 21. And we my family might be watching this, but oh well. The 4 of us was in the limousine with these plastic coffee cups, but we had liquor in the house.
Yeah. That's the thing now. The parents think you're drinking coffee, but really,
right? No,
but it's rough. But that's the only people in those moments that like know what you're feeling.
Yeah.
You can like really empathize and sympathize and understand what you're feeling, because you all felt the same thing and you all in the same spaces. So I definitely think that they're a gift. How does all of this of life, like when you sit down to write, do you like say, okay, this is what I'm going to write about and pick a topic, or do you just pick up the pen and like let it flow?
I'm really trying to write differently than I have been writing, because I don't think I have good writing habits. And I tell people all the time, I don't have good writing habits. And people who are fans of me, they're like, no, whatever is works because your stuff is so dope. And I'm like, yeah, but if you think this is dope, if I had good writing habits, I'd be that much better, right? And I'm aware of that, so I'm not satisfied. But so what tends to happen for me is I'm a concept writer, and like, oh, this is a good concept or idea, and I'll literally let it sit for a while until like I feel like the whole thing clicks. And then I'll have like a writing, tornado, right?
Right.
Throughout that time period, I might, make a couple of notes, but I have so many notes that I never really pick back up on. One poet told me, and he's a very accomplished poet, but he's the same age as me, but far more accomplished in some ways. He says, I need to stop trying to write masterpieces. And that's the problem. So if I don't have the masterpiece here, then I don't sit and finish anything. But if I literally wrote something every day, then by the time I get ready for the masterpiece, my skill level would be, higher, right? And so I'm trying really, I'm kind of going to, now that the show is over, I'm going to really be serious and push myself to write something every day, just to develop my skill, because it's a practice, right? And I am, not to be ego, but I'm gifted, right? I have a gift, right? But that takes you only but so far. I need to, my poetry took a boost when I started doing workshops during the pandemic. Literally one of the people's favorite poems, the version of that was trash, right? And yeah, so for myself to walk away and say I'm doing my best, I don't think I have good enough habits, but I have time to work on that now. But for the most part right now, if I have a concept, I let it sit, let it, marinate. And then when that moment hits where I got it, boom, I'm gonna write that and then go back to edit. But now I'm gonna write constantly so that when that moment happens, my skill level is higher,
Yeah, I'm a teacher, so I'm sitting here and I'm a teacher, but I'm an artist. So I'm sitting here and half of me is like, no, as a teacher, you're supposed to write every day. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm an English teacher, so we give the kids a journal, and every day, here's your 10 minutes where you're supposed, whatever you're thinking, just go ahead and write it down. And so the discipline in me of a teacher is like, yeah, do that. The artist in me is like you. I'm like, I want to have a concept. And then I'll write and then put it down and write and put it down and write and put it down. But I keep coming back to that concept. And so sometimes I'm like, well, I need to have a direction. Like I can write. I just need a direction. So I think it really depends. I do think though that the discipline of writing every day, just like reading every day, just like doing certain things, just makes you better.
Yeah.
Right. It's like training. You train for basketball, you train for track, you train for a marathon. It's just training yourself to be better. But I also know as an artist that sometimes we have to be inspired.
Yeah. But I say like if you can do both, right? Like if you can train every day, then when you're inspired, your muscles are stronger, right? Someone said the space between 90% and 100% is the same as 1 and 90, right? So, as far as I'm concerned, for me, and I tell this to my oldest daughter, she's an amazing dancer naturally, but she doesn't really practice. And I say to her, people like us and my youngest daughter and my sister right under me, I think they don't get stuff as naturally, but they work harder and do better than us, right? So I'll say to my daughter, I said, people who are like us, who are God tier at a particular skill, we get too comfortable with that and we don't do the work. But can you imagine how amazing we'd be? So people liked my show, and I did push myself many moments for my show, right? But like I did what I'm supposed to do right now, right? But I'm considering that 90%. Right. So when I get to, the point where I add the discipline to it.
Right. There's your 100%.
What is that going to look like? What I mean? This show was what it deserves its awards. It deserves all the ticket sales. It deserves all that. But then when I get to that level, what would that look like? And that's like beyond my imagination. Right. So I'm only more inspired to push to make that reality.
Yeah. That's your personal goals.
Yeah.
I love that. That's exciting. Well, where can everybody find you? Where can they get tickets? Where's all of the good stuff that people could get involved and come and see all the work that you guys are doing over there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So right now, the best way to find me is just walking around Harlem. No, but on Instagram at Broken Mirror OMS, Broken Mirror OMS, OMS as in one man show. The show's on pause right now, but there's stuff that's going to come down the pike. There's going to be, I already have a book, which is available on my website, theartistanubis.com, but there's going to be another book coming up with additional poems that's in the show. So follow me on Instagram for all those type of things. And then my organization, Harlem Bomb Shelter, even though I'm kind of taking a little rest personally, the organization, and I'm still creating new events. We have Poetry and Soul event, which is going to be poetry and jazz. I just had a phone call with the string instruments organization, and they're going to be collaborating. So you can follow that page at Harlem Bomb Shelter on Instagram. But for myself, it's Broken Mirror OMS on Instagram. And then the website is theartistanubis.com.
I love this. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, your voice, your stories, the community, building an outlet in the community where other people can come and tell their stories, for being so vulnerable in your own story that so many of us carry around with us. I appreciate you so much. And
Well,
all the work that you do.
My personal motto as an artist is I like to tell the stories that make me feel alone so that those of us who feel alone can feel alone together.
Oh, wow. Then we're never really alone.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Well, thank you so much, Anubis, for joining us today on Say It Loud podcast. I appreciate you. Make sure everybody, you go follow them on Instagram. Check out the website when the show goes live. Make sure you're getting your tickets as well as the books. We always love a book. So make sure that we're investing in our own communities because that's really important. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you again for joining me on Say It Loud podcast.